General, didn't the president really precipitate the kind of thing, the reaction and so forth of last Saturday night, a week ago, when he fired Cox, and all of the ensuing reaction, which you said you miscalculated completely? My question now is the president and Congress on a collision course in the question of naming a new special prosecutor? And what do you think is going to happen?
No, I don't think we're on a collision course, Helen, at all. There is a degree of partisanship involved in the current panorama, and there's hardly any question about that. But let me say a word about your reference to our miscalculation of the events of Saturday night. I think it's quite important that all of us understand just what these events were, just what led up to what I have described and some of your journalist friends have described as the firestorm of Saturday evening. As I pointed out at a press briefing on Monday before the Washington Press Corps, the weekend preceding this situation, the president concluded, and quite painfully, that the time had come for him to abandon, in this particular instance, his long-held conviction that he had a responsibility as the President of the United States to protect the prerogatives of this office, not only for himself, but for future presidents. But two events, two circumstances, led him to conclude that the time had come to put an end to what was now being described as an impending constitutional confrontation. These factors are this. First, there was a polarization occurring within our body politic. There were stories abroad to the effect that the Congress would hold the confirmation of Mr. Ford as new vice president in hostage to the Supreme Court determination of the tapes issue. This would be some 4 months in the future. There were suggestions made that if the president were to go against the Supreme Court decision, incidentally a prediction that he's already made to the American people he would not do, but if he were to do that, we would then be in a position in which Mr. Ford would not have been confirmed and the president would have been posed with an impeachable dilemma. And in effect, the mandate of the American people of past November would be replaced by placing the Speaker of the House in charge of the government. Now, recognizing that this is a view held by a select few of intense partisans, but recognizing also that the stage was being set for an increasing confrontation environment, the president felt that the time had come to make a Herculean effort to provide to both the courts and the Senate committee precisely what they had been asking for, and, in other words, to remove the point of confrontation on this issue. Now, secondly, and I'm sure that the situation in the Middle East, which we have been following and the president has been following moment by moment since the October 6th battle started, that his realization that foreign leaders involved in this conflict could in some way have their own judgments influenced by the domestic situation and increasing tension and increasing fractionalization within our society on this issue, that it was to our international interest to try to solve and remove this problem. That is precisely what was attempted. And I must say that the collective judgments of Senator Stennis, of Senator Irwin, of Senator Baker, and of the Attorney General, the then Attorney General of the United States, was that this was a very fair and very just solution to this agonizing problem. Now, what was not anticipated by any of the participants in this negotiated settlement was the position taken by Professor Cox, in which he himself, for his own reasons, decided that he could not participate in this kind of a compromise. And rather than resigning or perhaps accepting it for the moment and waiting for the next issue to arise to have his view prevail, he chose instead, before the entire Washington press corps at 1 o'clock last Saturday, to challenge the president's order to him to cease and desist, not from obtaining the information which he had thus far claimed he needed, which was to be provided to him in this compromise, but rather to insist on a carte blanche ability in the future to demand further personal presidential tapes and memoranda covering presidential conversations.
General Haig, if Special Prosecutor Cox or any other special prosecutor is to get to the bottom of Watergate and related crimes, doesn't he have to have the carte blanche to call for such things as White House logs and the kind of memoranda that Special Prosecutor Cox said that it was an absolute necessity? Doesn't he have to have that kind of freedom?
Dan, I'm glad you asked that question because I think there was some bad misunderstanding that coming out of Professor Cox's press conference. First, I want to make it very clear, as the Attorney General has, and as we have repeatedly, we've made a great deal of information and material available to Professor Cox and his investigating team from the outset. Now, secondly, I think the American people certainly got the impression that we've been intransigent on this issue since Professor Cox started his investigation. Nothing could be further from the truth. We have provided him with a full array of documentary evidence. Where the President has taken issue with Professor Cox has been on the subject of those limited documents involving personal discussions by the President himself and memoranda covering the substance of those discussions. All of the other data has been provided. Now Professor Cox raised the question that he had never been able to get the logs of meetings between the President and Mr. Chapin and Mr. Hunt and Mr. Liddy and Mr. Strawn. Here again, Professor Cox knew very well there had been no such meetings, and he had been told that repeatedly by the President's counsel. And yet, the American people were led to believe on Saturday that for some reason these logs were not being made available.
Well, for example,
there were no logs.
Well, to get off the logs per se, for example, this very important conversation that took place in the President's office connected with the so-called milk deal, let's use the shorthand of the streets. Now, that was a specific conversation that occurred at a specific time. There have been some very serious questions raised about whether contributions by the milk industry were given in exchange for limits on milk imports into this country. Now, that isn't a log. That's a specific conversation in which the President himself was involved. Now, that kind of memoranda, is that available to a special prosecutor?
That kind of memoranda, Dan, if I were to answer your question, I would be joining in a hypothesis which I would very strongly reject. First, let me say something about the milk price decision. That was a decision made by the President upon the recommendation of his staff and in coordination with the Congress. That was a decision that was made totally on those grounds and completely devoid of what I call external political pressure.
But it was opposed by the Secretary.
Kind you referred to. Now, secondly, there has been no request for any specific additional documents from Professor Cox, which are in the area that you described. So what we're dealing with here, and what a lot of the current anguish is surrounding, is a hypothetical question, which has not arisen. Now, as the President said on Friday, he is confident, and I am confident, with a reasonable degree of goodwill, that all of the information that the next special prosecutor will require will be made available to him in the form that is necessary for him to conduct his operations.
General Haig.
Under no circumstance would we ever be true to the preservation of the powers of the office of the president to permit any investigator a free-reigning fishing expedition into the vital discussions that occur in the president's office, and then perhaps to make whatever play of that he might seem
General Haig,
appropriate.
if I may
Yes, Bob.
review just for a moment what you seem to have been saying, the miscalculation that you yourself first brought up and conceded.
Yes.
Now, as I understand it, is simply that you and the President miscalculated what Mr. Cox was going to say in reaction to being fired. You don't conceive that it was a miscalculation that the Attorney General resigned and his deputy resigned, that there was a storm of political criticism brought down on the head of the President? It seems to me that you've oversimplified this miscalculation to some extent. Are you really saying that the President was not aware that the country reacted very strongly against his actions?
No, not at all, Bob. I think, again, you're putting words in my mouth that I would certainly not put there. Now, let me just, again, repeat. On Friday morning, the President of the United States, the Attorney General, the President's legal counsel, and myself had concluded that we had a proposition, a compromise, if you will, that would have met the legitimate requirements of all parties. No one, least of all the President, anticipated that Professor Cox would reject the proposal in the sense that he did reject it, and that is to publicly confront the President with a refusal to obey an order.
But what I'm
Now,
trying to get at is,
hold
are
on a
you
moment.
people politically realistic? Do you understand that, Cox aside, the President himself faces now a serious political crisis in this country? And
No,
it seems to me that you're dealing with it in a kind of an academic fashion, saying
I
that
hope
it's all
not,
going to go
Bob.
away.
It's hard for anyone who is in the vortex of this so-called storm you're describing to deal with it in an academic fashion, or to be oblivious to the kinds of pressures that have developed, and least of all the President, and least of all me. What I do want to point out and emphasize very clearly is that what the President entered into was a very forthcoming and judged to be very fair outcome to a difficult situation.
By whom?
Now, by all of the responsible players in this particular confrontation,
Are you saying
with the exception of Professor Cox. Now, when Professor Cox determined to move against the directions of the President, it was then that the issue of Elliot Richardson's future tenure first came into sharp perspective. And he, for his own reasons, which I understand, I don't necessarily share, but I certainly understand them, decided that his own commitment, his personal commitment at the time of his confirmation before the Senate Judiciary Committee, required him, as a matter of conscience, not to be the instrument of the order to separate Professor Cox.
General, that commitment was given to the Senate on behalf of the President, so it's the President's breach of faith. But to get to the special prosecutor again, you don't see any conflict with Congress with both trying to name a special prosecutor, and also, will a new special prosecutor have to pledge not to take the President to court if he needs more tapes, more memoranda, and so forth, in order to get the job, I mean?
Well, first, let me not let your little zinger go by, Helen, with respect to the President's abrogation of any commitment. We have, throughout this exercise, in full consultation with Attorney General Richardson and the President's legal counsel, been extremely careful to ensure that no advice was given to the President which would place him in a position contrary to the dictates of law. And we have yet to do so, and I think even Professor Cox has expressed that very clearly. Now, with respect to the future prosecutor, we all recognize that this issue has become intensely political in character. And like any political issue, where the stakes are the goodwill and the understanding of the American people, and indeed perhaps even the reins of power in this government, no issue of that character is going to be devoid of controversy and high-tension struggle by the parties involved. And we expect this to be a very partisan and a very difficult debate in the weeks ahead. But I am also confident that the American people who supported this administration and its objectives and goals will recognize the partisan character of this debate, and that the steps that we will take in the days and weeks ahead to appoint a special prosecutor with the kind of independence the President described on Friday will more than meet the criteria which the American people will set for themselves. And I have great confidence in their ability
Still haven't
to come
answered the
out
question,
correctly.
General. Will the new prosecutor have to pledge not to take the president to court?
I don't think the new prosecutor will have to make any pledge of any kind. Nor do I think he should, and if he were the type that would feel encumbered in that way, he's perhaps not the man that we would want.
General, we're inside the 3 minutes to go mark now.
Right,
I'd like to ask you whether the President agrees with the American Bar Association Board, which, in rather what was described to us as extraordinary meeting, agreed, I think, unanimously that a special prosecutor should be appointed by the Congress.
We, of course, welcome the views of the American Bar Association. We recognize the very keen views of its current president, and he's not been the least bit adverse to air them publicly in recent days. At the same time, no president can run this great republic by being the victim of a viewpoint of a particular advocate of a particular point of view. And I don't think President Nixon is going to feel encumbered by that recommendation.
Also, General,
but
earlier
he will not ignore it either.
Sorry. You spoke of the what you considered to be, I think, the intemperance of some of the reporting, as the President did in his news conference the other evening. And certainly no one would argue with yours and or the President's right to criticize the press. But the New York Times says this morning, and I quote, "The intemperance of President Nixon's news conference assault on the media in general and on television in particular did much to undermine the impression he was seeking to create of a president in full command of himself." End of quotation. Would you agree that that's a fair statement?
Dan, I've been with this president for the past 6 months in some very, very difficult situations. And I can assure you that the kinds of pressures that impinge upon this president during this Middle East crisis, which have been really the dominant focus of his attention and of ours in the White House, have been matched by a degree of calm and leadership and decisiveness on the part of the president, which every American citizen can be extremely proud and very confident that their government at this time is in good hands.
Thank you, General Alexander Haig.